Buick. It takes a car that makes every mile an adventure. Like the new 1964 Riviera by Buick. Adventure begins here and never ends. Riviera by Buick. A great and rare machine that a woman can admire and enjoy to the fullest, but only a man can really understand. Find a road yourself and discover adventure is a car called Riviera.
Well, that has to be one of the more sexist ads from the 1960s, something that it's pretty hard to believe that made it on the air when you look at it in the context of today. But in any case, the 1963 to 1965 Riviera is one vehicle that most designers would say is one of the most beautiful automobiles ever produced, and certainly one of the best vehicles from General Motors design. In fact, the car was lauded from a design standpoint by the likes of Sergio Pininfarina, who designed many different Ferraris and high-end Italian automobiles, and even Sir William Lyons of Jaguar fame. So the car really was a pure design expression of, well, let's just say a wonderful art form. And the inspiration for the Riviera was really that GM chief designer Bill Mitchell wanted the design team to come up with a car that blended Rolls-Royce and Ferrari styling, if you can believe that. So you got a bit of sport and a bit of luxury. And you can see that in the lines. The Rolls-Royce, in terms of the very tight lines, that crisp roof and the crisp edges to it, and coupled that with this Coke bottle styling, which means that the rear quarter panel has this kick up and then flare out on it, similar to the Studebaker Avanti, as well as many other cars of the 1960s. But the Riviera was one of the first, along with the Avanti, to display this Coke bottle theme in the rear. Now, one little tidbit of history that many don't know about the Riviera is that it actually wasn't born a Riviera at all, but in fact, it was designed as a LaSalle. And there was some talk of reviving that mark, or at least the nameplate, within General Motors. And you can see what the original proposal looked like here. Notice the LaSalle badging up front on the grille, as well as the license plate. But the car really looked about the same in final production form as it does here, aside from the exposed headlamp look. And you can see that there's another headlight that's concealed behind the front fender light cap. But that was one of the things why Buick ended up getting this vehicle, and it was shopped around to Buick, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac, each of whom wanted a personal luxury coupe because Ford was having so much success with the four-place Thunderbird at this time. GM divisions were trying to recapture some of that magic, and Buick ended up winning out over Oldsmobile and Pontiac because they were the division that said, we will take the LaSalle basically as designed and not alter it. Pontiac wanted some significant alterations, as did Oldsmobile, and so they did not get the opportunity to produce this beautiful car. And in this final version from 1963 that you see here, those thin blades on the fender end caps, that really was an homage to the last LaSalle. That's where that came from. Now, as I mentioned, the car was introduced in 1963. What I'm showing here is a 1963 model, and a principal way that you can tell the difference between the 63 and the 64 is, well, first of all, they both have exposed headlamps. The 65 does not have the exposed headlamp, so it's pretty easy to tell a 63 and a 64 from a 65. But the 63 does not have that stylized R with a circle around it, Riviera logo, displayed anywhere on the car. It just has the Buick emblem or the Riviera script, but not that R stylized logo. And if we look more closely here at the wind split and what emblem is on it, you'll see it is in fact the Buick Tri-Shield. Now in the 1964 Riviera, which you're going to see in a second, this Tri-Shield is replaced by that stylized R and a little stand-up, I guess you want to call it, hood ornament, but it's different than what you see here on this 1963 version. And the same is true when you rotate around to the rear of the car. Let's take a look at the rear of this 1963. In the tail lamps, you'll see little Buick tri-shields as well. So 63 has little Buick tri-shields in the tail lamps, on the wind-split molding. And if you look on the interior of the 1963, you'll see in the door panels it has this Riviera script. It doesn't have the R with the circle around it. So these are some of the easy ways to tell the 1963 from the 1964. Now let's take a look at the 64. And first off, you can see up front you have that stand-up R with the circle around it, Riviera emblem on the wind-split molding. So again, that's one of the easy ways to tell that this is a 64. And then out back, you have that similar R in the taillights. The rear also has the Riviera script on the passenger side of the deck lid as opposed to Buick spelled out in block lettering and centered on the deck lid. And then on the interior, among other things, you do have that stylized R as well on the door panels. But beyond the script R on the door panels, you have in any Riviera from 63 to 65 one of the most beautiful interiors ever put in an automobile, with these dual round gauge pods for the speedometer as well as the fuel gauge and other lights. And then you have this center stack with the HVAC controls as well as various other controls like the power antenna or the courtesy lights and the radio. That is just absolutely stunning. Now, this particular car has an aftermarket steering wheel in it, so disregard that. But you can still see the overall beauty of the interior with this metal combined with wood look. And, well, it's just a absolutely gorgeous interior. I think one of my favorites of all time. But let's talk for a moment about what makes the 1964 Riviera special. Well, the first thing is that if you're looking to collect one of these 63 through 65 Rivieras, unfortunately, the prices for the 65 Rivieras have just gone through the roof in the last 10 to 15 years. They're really challenging to find in great shape for anything near reasonable price points. And mint condition copies are going for some cases 60, 70, 80,000 plus, depending upon what options the car has. And if it's a Grand Sport package, well, even higher than that. So then you're kind of relegated to a 63 or 64, and I would pick the 64. And the main reason is that the 1964 simply has a better standard engine than the 1963. More specifically, the 1964 Riviera came standard with the Wildcat 465 engine, which the 465 denoted the torque rating, but it was 425 cubic inches, 340 horsepower. And the 1963 Riviera came standard with the 401 cubic inch nailhead Buick V8, the Wildcat 445 that made 325 horsepower. Now, partway through the 1963 model year, you could get the optional 425 cubic inch engine, but the take rate was very low. I think only about 2,500 cars in 1963 had that 425 cubic inch V8. So if you get a 1964 V8, you get the big nailhead, the 425 cubic incher, for free. So why not get the big V8 and, well, have some more power under hood? You also could get an optional Super Wildcat V8 that had two 4-barrel carburetors atop the 425 cubic inch engine, and that gave you a little bit more power. More specifically, the dual 4-barrels gave you 360 horsepower. The single 4-barrel 425 was 340 horsepower. Now, for 1965, Buick went back to the 401 cubic inch V8 as standard equipment on the Riviera. So the 64 actually has the best standard engine of all, unless you're looking for a second generation Riviera and you really want the nailhead. The 1966 second generation Riviera has the only year nailhead V8 in the second gen Riviera, and it's the 425 cubic incher with 340 horsepower. In 1967, Buick would introduce their new 430 cubic inch V8, which was an all-new design, totally different from the nailhead, and in many ways, a better engine, although both the nailhead and the 430 are really, really good engines. They do have some minor flaws. I would say the 430, the biggest one, is the timing cover, the aluminum timing cover, especially if you have to replace the water pump and breaking bolts off, as well as the oil pump drive on those can sometimes wear out. But I've had really good luck with my Buick V8s, and the nailheads are super smooth and wonderful. So again, the big thing about the 64 is, well, first of all, you get the cool R with a circle logo on it. And on top of that, you get the nice big V8, so why not get the 64? Now, if you want to spend some more money on your 64, you can splurge for the Super Wildcat V8. Here's a picture of one under hood in a 64 Riv. Notice that chrome air cleaner with the dual snorkels, and it says Super Wildcat. Pretty tight fit in terms of the engine in this engine bay. In fact, it was such a tight fit on this particular platform that the Harrison cooling engineers had to put the air conditioning evaporator inside the car as opposed to under hood, as it typically is in most GM vehicles of the era and would be on the second generation Riviera, but this was too much to be shoehorned, I guess, in this small space. And here's a photo of the dual Carter AFB carburetors under hood in the Super Wildcat engine. The back carburetor there was the one that was employed full-time, and then the front carburetor was employed only when the accelerator was depressed more than a certain length of travel. And you can tell that because the rear carburetor has a choke plate. The front carburetor does not. So it's obviously not starting off of that front carburetor. But these Carter AFBs are excellent carburetors used on many GM vehicles during the period, particularly before GM came out with their Quadrajet carburetor. And the AFB is really what Edelbrock patterned their carburetor after. Just an excellent, reliable, all-around carburetor. And whether or not you got the Super Wildcat or the regular Wildcat engine under hood in your 64 Riviera, you had a smooth ride. And that was due to this X-frame coupled with the requisite suspension. But the 63 to 65 Rivieras had this X-frame as opposed to a perimeter frame. And that design of the frame would carry over into the second generation Riviera to the point that I believe the 1970 Riviera, the last of the second generation, would be the last General Motors vehicle produced with an X-frame. All the rest had gone to a perimeter frame, or we'll call it unibody with subframes by that point. But the Riviera held on to this X-frame for many years, even after the Toronado and the Eldorado, which were its platform mates beginning in 1966. Well, the Eldorado came out in 1967. Had a different frame, kind of a 3/4 length perimeter frame. So the Riv stuck with this design, I guess because it worked well. And candidly, that 63 to 65 Riv or the 66 to 70 are just excellent driving cars. The 66 Tornado and the 67 Eldorado, the ride isn't that great. So there you have it. If you're going to get a first generation Riviera and you want to spend as little coin and get the best value for your buck, I would recommend this 64 Riviera. Get the big engine, get all the creature comforts, get that stylized R logo, and just get a great looking car, the combination of Ferrari and Rolls-Royce, designed at the height of General Motors styling. And there you have it, the 1964 Riviera. Thanks again for watching.